Welcome to this video for our treasurers that are serving our local churches. We are so thankful for the work and the service that you provide. It's a challenging job, and our hope is to be able to provide you with some information, support, resources that will help you do your job even better. So I am Lori Beth Huffman, the Appalachian District Superintendent, and I have with me two treasurers. Bruce Barrier is the treasurer at Assurance United Methodist, which is a large membership church, and Jennifer Burton, who is our conference treasurer, but also serves as the local treasurer for Pleasant Grove United Methodist in Thomasville, which is a medium-sized church. So thanks to both of you for offering your expertise and helping guide our conversation today. So we're going to start with the topic of payroll issues for both pastor and staff. So Bruce, let me start with you, and why don't you share what are some of the best practices for payroll, and particularly around pay cycles and how you handle writing those checks or paying your staff.
Okay, well, just about like every other aspect of being a treasurer, confidentiality is, foremost important.
Sure.
Personally, for me, I have found that a biweekly pay schedule works the best. When I first started, I had employees that were paid monthly and some biweekly, and it just, it's just cumbersome sometimes.
Sure.
And it's, as far as the tax reporting and all that stuff, it's just easier to do it on a biweekly basis. I would suggest, if at all possible, to use like a payroll service. Once we got about 5 employees, it really got to the point where I needed some help. So the church was gracious enough to, bring on the payroll service, and that's worked wonderful. They do everything. They do the tax deposits, the quarterly reporting, the W-2s at the end of the year. And we found it runs about, the service we're using, $8 an employee per pay period.
Okay.
And I'm aware of some banks that'll even do it for free if you're a small enough organization.
Okay. So that could be part of the services they provide if you bank with them. That would be worth exploring.
Yes, definitely.
So if your church has 6 or more employees, it's definitely worth looking into doing payroll off-site for your treasurer. What about direct deposit versus cutting those checks and trying to get it in the hand of the staff?
Yeah, direct deposit's wonderful. That way you're not having to chase the staff down or the pastor on Sunday morning and, give them their checks, and people coming to you wanting their checks, and you feel like you have to be at church every Sunday so you can pay them on payday, and so yeah.
Right, because we're there Sundays to worship, and that should be the focus as well. So Jennifer, why don't you share with us about the 1099 versus the W-2 for payroll, and who is supposed to receive what?
That lovely year-end reporting. This payroll service idea really makes a whole lot easier. But specifically for employees and really for the pastor as well, because he's an employee of the church, it should be always a W-2 to those persons. The tax status of a United Methodist minister is different from many other ministers of other denominations, such that ours specifically do receive W-2s outside of advice that I've heard from other accountants in the area. For 1099 purposes, those would be given to anyone who's paid more than $600, but specifically like vendors, like a landscape lawn care person, janitorial services. But you also could have some people like musicians or others like that who you consider more of a contractor than an employee, because you're not necessarily setting their hours and things like that. And those folks will be the ones who would get a 1099, but not those people that are considered employees, like a treasurer or secretary of the church, and especially the pastor. Okay. For a pastor's W-2, a lot of that information can come straight off their clergy compensation form that they filled out at the beginning of the year, so that's a very easy place to find that information.
Sure. And we'll talk about the clergy comp in a second. Where can church treasurers go to get more information about figuring out the contract versus the W-2 versus 1099?
Oh, excellent question. And this is one reason that we're here at the conference office too as well, because we can provide resources such as these items to the local churches and the treasurers out there. One resource we have in our office, Kathy Odell, started with us in March as our Human Resources Director. She's available to all our local churches to ask questions related to those human resources ideas, especially an independent contractor versus employee question. We also have a publication on our conference administrative website that's in the publications section once you get on that website, and it's entitled Employee or Contract Ruling or questionnaire, something to that effect. But if you'll see employee versus contractor, then that's the document that you'd want to have.
And our conference website, we'll refer to it a couple of times, but that administrative services website has so much information that is
Yes.
helpful for treasurers that you can explore that.
Yeah,
on your own.
I've used that myself, and I've used that very form because, unfortunately, most people are W-2 employees, and
Yes.
not very many qualify to be a 1099.
So that does segue then into talking about the clergy compensation form. And I have a blank copy of that right here. And this is, in some ways, it's almost like a financial contract for the pastor and the church. And so there is very helpful information here for the treasurers as well as the pastors. And so once the staff parish, pastor parish relations committee sets that salary, then a lot of this information ends up being populated in. And this first section is up to the pastor to determine, are there any salary reductions that they want to participate in. And so it really is their prerogative on what they choose to do, but it does have to be approved by the church once they make those choices and decisions. And it is also very important to note that if a pastor wants to participate in the medical reimbursement or the dependent care, then the church has got to have a flexible medical spending plan signed and on file at their church. And this is a one-time document, so it doesn't have to change every time or be redone every time a pastor transitions.
Exactly.
But I think we have a lot of churches that might be participating in that medical reimbursement but don't have the plan signed, and this is required by law. So if you need to get an example of one of those plans, the best advice is to contact your district superintendent, because we all have examples that we can share with churches that you can then get that taken care of and get on file. The next section is the non-salary items. And so the church has to determine travel, continuing ed, annual conference, and if there's housing in lieu of providing a parsonage. And I want to pause and talk about those accountable reimbursable expenses, particularly around the travel. That seems to be another area where we are not following best practices in a lot of churches, I have discovered. So this is a reimbursable expense, and that means that the pastor has to turn in the receipt in order to be reimbursed for the expense. So with travel, you cannot take the travel amount allotted by the church, divide by 12, and pay with the salary check to the pastor.
Correct.
That is not appropriate. You've got to provide, the pastor has to provide a travel log or reimbursement request. And that can be handled in several different ways. So we also, on our website, have some examples.
Yes.
Because you need to provide enough information to show the travel expenditures, but you don't want to be revealing particularly like pastoral care visits and who you went to see. So that information can also be shared with the PPRC at that level, so that you as treasurers just receive kind of the basic information of how many miles were driven for what basic category. It's important that you work out your system so that it is reimbursable, that the pastor is turning in on a regular basis, and don't just pay out that travel as a salary. This is also a document that once it is completed, it now requires the treasurer's signature. So please make sure that you get a copy of this clergy comp form. We've also found that in some places, the treasurer does not receive it, and it really is important information that they need in order to do their job. The utilities is another piece that I need to talk about on this. In the past, many churches used to pay utilities for their pastors, and now don't realize that that is considered salary for the
It's true.
pastor. Whether you pay it to the utility itself or to the pastor. And so it's really important that you actually let the pastor turn in that receipt and then you reimburse them for that expense so that for their tax purposes, they are actually reporting all of the salary that they are receiving.
Lori Beth, on that point, there's one other item much like that came up at the end of 2013 from an IRS ruling. And it relates a lot to the Affordable Health Care Act that we are all now subject to, it seems like. But if a church is paying for the health premiums of a pastor's spouse and or dependents, if that payment is made, whether it's to the insurance company or to the pastor, same as the utilities, if it is a part of our conference group health plan, it should be included in the income of the pastor, but can also be shown in line 2B related to the benefits for the medical benefits for them because it is in the conference plan. However, if they're paying an outside insurance company, it's not through the conference plan. It still has to be included in income but can't come through as a reduction of the salary.
Okay.
So that's something new to note for all of our local treasurers out there.
Okay. So Jennifer, what else from the on the clergy comp do the treasurers need to pay particularly close attention to, maybe in regards to the W-2 that they have to provide at the end of the year?
I'll kind of answer that in a couple different ways because one, this clergy compensation form is going to be important for them at the beginning of the year because it's going to tell them what withholding should be done from the pastor's salary in order to know what to pay him or her. At the end of the year, which is what you were speaking to, this also tells you what items are going to reduce the taxable salary that will be reported to the pastor on the W-2 at the end of the year. So that's a key right there. One other resource for the local treasurers as they fill out the W-2s, I'll also mention here, is that we have an example that was written actually by GCFA, the General Council on Finance and Administration, posted to the documents section of our administrative website. And it goes through using the clergy compensation form to tell you exactly where to put what numbers on the W-2. So it makes it one step easier on how to fill out the W-2 at the end of the year for our local church treasurers.
Wonderful. That sounds really helpful as they're trying to figure out that very important document that they're responsible for if they aren't using a payroll service, right?
And sometimes if they are using the payroll service, because you have to make sure they understand those columns too.
Yeah,
the
sometimes
payroll-
the payroll service does not understand
Yes.
churches.
Gotcha.
Right.
You have to help interpret that to
Right.
the payroll
Yes.
service.
Yes.
Okay. So our next topic is talking about kind of the role of the pastor and the finances. And this is important because it's kind of boundary issues with the pastor and the treasurer and the finance committee. And so it is important to reiterate that pastors should have nothing to do with hands-on with money in the church, really ever. Pastors, we should not touch the money. We shouldn't count the money. We shouldn't collect the money. We shouldn't deposit the money. And so that's just a very important boundary. But that does not mean that the pastor should not have any knowledge over what's happening with how the finances are being handled and how the money is being handled. Right. So our role is more on, do we have good policies and procedures in place? Do we have enough lay folk to do the different roles that are needed, and are they supported? And how are our finances looking, but not hands-on on the money? And another sort of sticky wicket that treasurers run into is whether pastors have the ability or authority to look at financial giving. And I know that crosses over with the financial secretary, probably more so than the treasurer, but it's oftentimes a conversation that you are a part of. And there are different perspectives on whether this is a best practice or not. I can share with you from the district superintendent's perspective and a pastor's perspective that pastors having knowledge, or at least just accessibility to see what parishioners are giving, can be very helpful information from a spiritual perspective. And I want to be clear about that because I think folks get concerned that the pastor isn't going to provide good pastoral care if they know what folks are giving, or it won't be consistent. But the reality is a pastor that is professional is going to care for all of the sheep regardless of that issue. Where it becomes helpful and important is being able to identify who your really faithful, strong, deep discipled leaders are in your church. And stewardship, financial giving, is one of those pieces of information. Worship attendance, participation in Bible study, prayer life, being healthy. All of these are factors that show someone is going deep with their discipleship. So when it comes to nominations, pastors, we want to be lifting up some of our best lay folk to be examples and leaders. And when you don't have that financial piece of information, sometimes you can lift up someone that is not the example that you really want to have. Particularly, the head of your stewardship campaign needs to be someone who is a faithful giver. So it's really even not about the amount, but it's about being faithful and regular in their giving, committed to giving. So I advocate that can be very important information for the pastor, and the treasurer may be involved in that conversation and helping to navigate, because it can be difficult. Some folks don't like that at all. So moving on, let's talk about one of the most problematic pieces of the charge conference, the audit. Whenever we receive our charge conference paperwork, hands down, that is a form that is either not filled out honestly, or in my district, often isn't filled out at all, and we have to chase it down. And so, Jennifer, talk to us about what we mean when we're asking churches to do an audit. That's the word that's used.
Yes.
And why is this important?
Will do. I always say, as a former person in public accounting, I wish they had never used the word audit.
Right.
It has a whole different connotation in the accounting world than it does in our book of discipline. Audit is simply a review, basically, at the end of the year on some agreed upon procedures related to the financial practices and the documents of the church. It is required by the discipline to have one every year. Many think that, oh, we've got a great treasurer, we don't need to worry about that. But really, they need to consider that when we do the audit, we're actually protecting the treasurer, and we're protecting the people of the church, so that there are no questions about what's happened during the year. No one can come up and accuse a treasurer of something happening or anything like that, even grounded or not. So it sets all that stuff away and provides that protection. From an idea of what we need to do, there is a local church audit guide. It's published by the General Council on Finance and Administration, again, GCFA, published on our website, again, in the documents section, or actually publications section, I believe it is. And it was actually updated last year, but it goes through step by step all those basic procedures that need to be looked at, how to go about doing them, etc. Now, who should do that work? You don't want somebody that is necessarily outside. If it's a larger church, typically we think maybe 300,000 in revenues or something like that. It's a larger church, a larger financial statement that they might have. You might want to think about having an outside counsel do it, outside accountants do it, rather than someone who's in the church. Otherwise, you could have someone who's in the church, someone who is in a sister church in, say, your missional network, but you've got to have a qualified person, someone who understands the financial practices of the church and has some financial expertise. It can be done with some of the finance committee members as well as an independent person from another church, and done together. Various and sundry different ways that it could be done, but those are the basic pieces. Doesn't have to be outside unless you're probably a larger church, and then it's a best practice to have that done, and definitely no one that's related or being a part of the finances, but somebody who is qualified with some financial expertise.
And another way I know some churches handle this is they may periodically, like every few years, have an outside audit done, because it does cost money. I mean, that can be expensive.
Very expensive.
Very expensive.
And so they'll do that periodically as a check and balance, and then in between time, for maybe 3 or 4 years, they'll do an internal audit and have folks check, so that they're kind of getting the best of both world over time.
Exactly.
but
But
the
that
m-
would be perfectly acceptable.
Right.
But the most important thing is there needs to be that check and balance. That
Yes.
someone else outside of your typical finance handlers are looking to make sure that the practices or the policies are being followed.
Exactly.
So, talking about policies being followed, Bruce, share with us about why having a finance policy and procedures is important, and maybe how your church came about getting one in place.
Well, as Jennifer was saying, well, we started with a small church,
Okay.
and through the years, it's gotten larger and larger.
Sure.
Good or bad, I've been the treasurer
Through all of it.
through all of it. And yeah, it is to protect me, and I'm wanting them, glad that they're wanting to do that. But as we've grown, it's like I've taken on more and more, and it's like I'm kind of doing everything.
Right.
And it's like, well, what would happen if something would happen to me?
Sure.
Even.
Sure.
And so we also got serious about needing to do a review, and we realized we don't have anything documented.
Okay.
It's a lot of it was up here in my head, and the procedures that we go through, there at the church. And so we decided, well, we were exploring bringing in an outside firm, and like we said, good bit of money. And we realized, what are they going to audit? We didn't have any procedures in place for them to audit.
Okay.
They could look at the bank balances,
Reconcile,
and all that kind of stuff. But as far as internal controls, and to see that proper documentation, approval was done on vendor invoices, and all that kind of stuff, we didn't have anything in place.
Okay.
So we spent a year at least
Okay.
developing guidelines. People jotted down, what they did, and then we kind of, changed some things and thought of better ways to do things, and came up with a written financial policy that we just recently adopted, so that now our plan is, go with these guidelines, and so now we can have an outside firm come in and audit.
Do a true audit.
Do a true audit, and then go 3 or 4 years. And we have a lot of CPAs in the church and accountants in the church
Yeah.
that
can help do the internal.
do the review.
And maybe, as you were talking, I thought of two things. One, even if you're a church, maybe especially if you're a church that does not have a lot of experienced accounting people, that having those financial policies in place make it easier for someone coming in trying to do the job, because the policies
Definitely.
are in place, and so then it becomes, all right, here's what needs to happen. And you reminded me, at one of the churches that I served, we had a treasurer who actually got injured at his work, and it was a head injury.
Oh.
And thankfully it was not serious, but for about 3 days we were freaking out, because we realized we didn't have an assistant treasurer in place, and the only other, I think there's like one other person was a co-signer on checks, and so that was a reminder that as part of our policies, we needed to have backups in
Yes.
place in case something did happen
Right.
to our wonderfully competent treasurer that knew how to do everything. That it reminded us we need to be prepared and cross-train a few folks
Exactly.
in some of the jobs.
And especially, like you said, with the co-signers, in case for whatever reason that
Exactly.
somebody
Right.
becomes incapacitated.
Right. Well, y'all have been gracious enough to let us share the policy that Assurance United Methodist has put in place, and so that we'll have a template of one that, for some churches, it might be more detailed than they need, and so our advice is to adapt it to what works best, but use that as a guide to all of the different pieces of the financial picture and practices, so that you are covering all of your bases and setting up best practices. That's our encouragement here, is our responsibility of handling the finances of the church. We just want to have the appropriate checks and balances and policies so that everyone is protected, and those precious resources that church people entrust us with are taken good care of, so we can do ministry. That's the whole point here.
Lori Beth, one little thing that I remembered as you were saying that, and especially with looking at the financial practice document that we have from Assurance, is one of the key things. Adapt it, adapt it, adapt it. But what you're really searching for is to keep segregation between record keeping, custody, and approval. That's really what you're aiming for. You can do it with a few people or with a lot of people. It can range all the way through all different sizes of our local churches.
Okay, very good.
Good point.
So, Jennifer, let's talk for a minute about common questions that you have received around designated or restricted funds. Almost every church has them. I don't
Yes.
care how small or big you are. There's cemetery funds, there's building funds, there's scholarship funds, there's playground funds. What have you learned? What are the questions folks are asking?
The first big one that always comes up is how can we use these monies somehow else? The answer is always, if it's been restricted or designated by that donor, no, you have to use it the way they told you they wanted it used. So you can't go changing that. That leads to one of our second questions we always get: do we have to keep everything in a separate bank account? How can we handle this? You don't have to keep everything in a separate bank account. You can put things together, but that goes back to the record keeping related to what's in that bank account. You need to have either a spreadsheet or some other, within an accounting software package, to know that you may have 6 different types of monies all within this one account, and that they're designated for different restrictions, different purposes, different things to be used for. So that's 2 of the main ones. We also hear about churches borrowing from those funds because their operation funds are low or something like that, and they need to, we'll pay it back. Well, that's not always the case, and from a best practices standpoint, I usually just say, no, you should not borrow from the funds. Many times you might have a building fund or a capital improvement fund or even a cemetery fund that money has accumulated in. Oh, well, we can just take that. They don't need that. No, no, no. It was set aside for that purpose, restricted by the donor. It needs to stay there and not be utilized other places.
Absolutely, that becomes very tricky in trying to pay it back.
Yes.
And it's just not good decision making. If you're reaching the point where you are having to borrow or trying to borrow from those restricted funds, then you need to look at your overall finances and
There's
see.
something
you're
bigger
in
that might be
trouble.
going on.
Right, right.
We call it a slippery slope.
Yes, yes.
'Cause it doesn't take but one slip and off you go.
Right. It also strikes me that you were talking about, well, the accounting piece of it is what's critical, so that as long as you're keeping good records,
Yes.
you don't have to separate them out into different accounts.
That
Different
becomes
bank accounts.
Different bank accounts.
Yeah,
Yes.
It
separate.
becomes very cumbersome to have too many bank accounts.
yeah,
Just
definitely.
every little
Right.
thing.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about sales tax. This is a practice that I think most churches know about, but Bruce, how do you handle sales tax at your church? What is your recommendation for churches to get the best return on that gift to us?
Well, you need to always make sure the church pays the bill.
Okay.
If someone goes out and buys something, an individual, a member of the church, and then gets reimbursed, that is not eligible for a sales tax reimbursement.
Okay.
We have it set up, ours is set up in the books. Whenever we record, we isolate out the sales tax.
Okay.
And that helps whenever you do the return, which is every 6 months. And you can actually, if you've forgotten to do it, you can go back 3 years
Oh, wow.
and file a claim for the refund.
So, so essentially, anytime the church makes a purchase, we do not have to pay sales tax. In other words, it gets reimbursed back to
You
us.
do pay the sales tax,
Right.
but
It gets
right.
reimbursed.
In the state of North Carolina, people always say, "I want your tax number." Well, that does not anything to do with sales tax. They're
Okay.
confused. In North Carolina, you have to pay the sales tax up front,
Okay.
and then you make application to get a refund back.
All right. And so, where is the application? How does a treasurer find out how to actually?
You can go to the Department of Revenue, North Carolina Department of Revenue, on the
Their
web,
website?
and the conference also has it on their website.
Great. So the resources are there. So that's really it's easy.
It's just easy money.
Good, good, good. But that important thing is helping church folk realize that you're actually not helping the church out by making, particularly if it's a large purchase, donate that money to the church and let the church make the
Definitely,
purchase.
yes,
You have
yes.
saved, you've reduced the cost of that big purchase. So what about 501c3 or nonprofit status? How do you handle it when you get asked about?
Yeah, that's the same. Yeah, when those people say, I want your tax number, a lot of times it's for making a donation,
Okay.
like wanting their 501c3. The local church is part of what we call the big church.
Right.
The big whole United Methodist Church.
Connectional
Right.
United Methodist Church.
And you make application to the general council or conference,
Council of
the
Five.
GCFA,
yeah,
exactly.
right. And they will issue you a letter or certificate that states that your church is part of the United Methodist Church, and you're covered by a blanket. Was something
Group
back in
ruling.
the group ruling back in the 70s or something.
Yeah.
Great.
And then you have that whenever someone needs proof that you are a nonprofit in 501c3.
Okay. So we fall under that ruling for the general church as individual churches, and they can access that letter.
Yes.
Correct. Yeah.
In order to fill out that form, we have that form on our documents page on the website under group ruling request form, and they can fill it in. My discussions with GCFA legal department, who's the one that issues those, says that they'll do a 48-hour turnaround.
Yeah,
You can scan
we've
it or
gotten
email.
theirs at Assurance, and they were real quick in
Great.
turning that around.
Great. All right. So we talked earlier a little bit about these policies and procedures are in place to help protect the treasurer as well as the church. Jennifer, explain what bonding means and why do we need it and how do we get bonding for our treasurers?
Bonding for the local church treasurer years ago used to be handled at the conference level. That was changed through ruling at General Conference because it's now a part of our Book of Discipline says that the local church treasurer has to be bonded at the local church level.
Okay.
What bonding means is basically protection of the church in case there is any embezzlement, malfeasance, fraud perpetrated by the treasurer is what it relates to. It could come in there's three basic names of this, but it can be found in your church's insurance policy,
Okay.
what you would get basically on the church building itself. It's either called theft of money and securities, it could be called employee dishonesty, or crime coverage. And basically, you set a coverage amount as to what you want it to be. The conference, through the general church as well, recommends a minimum coverage of $25,000, which means if there is an embezzlement or someone comes into your home, if you haven't, heaven forbid, this is not supposed to happen, but had you taken the deposit home before you went to the bank, someone breaks in overnight and gets that deposit, it covers that as well. And that $25,000 would be your maximum limit. Now, we say that you always need to look at your accounts. What do you have from cash, investments, endowments, anything like
Right.
that? Because if your balances are high enough that an embezzlement occurred, it could be much larger than that $25,000. You also want to see how often do you get financial statements, or how often do you think a fraud could be seen in your financial statements? Is that oversight strong enough? So you always want to consider all of those pieces in determining how much your coverage should be.
Okay.
But if you'll talk to your local insurance agent in getting your church's insurance policy, they can help lead you through that conversation as well and tell you exactly where it is in your church's policy. But it is handled now at the church level.
Great. So let's circle back to best practices
Okay.
and talk about the deposits. Because I have personally had that experience with one of the churches I've served where the treasurer did take the money home to count and recount before depositing. But Bruce, best practices on how that money is handled.
No, it needs to be handled by at least two or more people. We prefer our accounting team. At Assurance, we use members from the finance committee, and they rotate through on a monthly basis. We have what we call a head teller.
Sure.
We have one person that's like oversees everything.
Okay.
We also have just started remote depositing our checks. We've gotten pretty large now to where
What does that mean?
we have a scanner from the bank, provided us with a scanner, free of charge, I might add.
Cool.
And then on Sundays, we just total up everything. And then on Monday or Tuesday, our financial secretary scans the checks through this machine, and it just immediately automatically deposits it
Wow.
into the bank.
Okay.
We could do it on Sunday after church, except people are ready to go home or what have you. And they're volunteers.
Sure.
So
Pretty neat.
So do y'all take the offering and put it into
we have a safe.
safe.
We have a safe.
and then people come back and count?
They count after church. Immediately after church, they count. We take the cash. We do take the cash to the bank
Gotcha.
right after
Do a
church.
deposit.
Two people go and deposit the cash, and then the checks are run through on Monday.
So payroll and free scanning are two things to explore with the banks
Mm-hmm.
that you may want to start using your
Right.
working with them, having
Yeah,
your account
yeah,
there,
exactly.
because that might be a service that they offer. So here's the pushback that I get from the smaller churches that are in my district. We don't have enough people to do all of that. But the reality is,
If you've got two,
right. It is not that hard to get the appropriate checks and balances. That it's not two related people,
right?
and it's not staff,
Not a treasure.
and
Yeah.
not the treasurer. But at the very least, that money can get deposited, soon, and not be in anybody's hands for too long, because it just is a risk that's not worth taking, whether it's potential mishandling by the person or extenuating circumstances that could happen to them. So you want to get that money into the bank as soon as you can, and best practices sometimes do require a little more time to do it well. But I have had churches in my district that have dealt with embezzlement, and I promise you, getting that money deposited and having the checks and balances is way worth the pain and loss when something does go wrong. And so that's really, really important.
And I'll just add, whether we like it or not, this way of handling our deposits in our churches is mandated in the Book of Discipline.
Right.
That's
It's
true.
the way
Right.
it's supposed to be. We just add a little bit more to it to make it best practices, because it's a very thin description in the Book of Discipline, but it is required.
Right. And that's because we've had
Had
to
it-
deal with the consequences
Exactly.
when we didn't do some of these things the way we were really supposed to do them.
Yes, we could tell you the horror stories.
Yes.
But we'll save those for a later date.
We don't even want to go there. We want to prevent them.
Exactly.
So we're almost done here, but let's talk a little bit about apportionments, one of our favorite topics.
Okay.
But I actually, especially as serving as a district superintendent, I see even more clearly how those apportionment dollars go to work and provide ministry opportunities and possibilities that make me thankful I'm part of a connectional church that realizes we can be stronger together when we pool our resources than an individual church can ever be alone. And that's essentially what apportionments allow us to do, is to pool resources together for a greater good and a greater kingdom work. But can you briefly explain or share what's that calculation for how a church gets assigned their apportionment?
Not a problem. The first thing I will say about the calculation for the apportionment does not include anything related to membership. Everyone still believes that old formula still exists, and it hasn't existed for probably at least a decade.
Okay.
So we no longer have any portion of the membership being a part of that calculation. So essentially that calculation then becomes, what are your local church expenditures compared to the total of all local church expenditures in our conference?
Okay.
And based on your share of the total, that's how much your share of the conference budget is. And that's the apportioned number. Now, someone will ask, what local church expenditures go into that calculation? Well, we basically take everything that's reported in Table 2 of the statistical report at the end of the year, but we don't utilize mission givings, whether it's to other denominations or other ministries, our denomination, or through the general church. And we don't use anything that was paid on a building improvement, a capital improvement, or on principal and interest on debts. So basically, it's your operating expenditures, your program expenditures, your salaries, and pension and health for the church, for the clergy person.
Okay. So then following up to that, from that, how can treasurers access the amount that their church owes and track how much they've paid towards their apportionments? Where can they get this information? Because they're no longer sent a bill in the mail.
Exactly. Two things. One, first of all, always back to the conference administrative website. It's the wealth of information related to financial
that seems to be
affairs.
a theme here, doesn't
Exactly. If you don't have a login, call your district office. They'll set you up with one. In September, usually the first part of September is the first time you can access what your apportionments are going to be for the coming year. Okay. So when you're doing budgets and all that, that's the first place to find it. Okay. You'll go to your church page and go to your apportionments tab, and there's your whole set of what it's going to look like. Compared to last year, the whole formula, everything. Throughout the year, then when you get, like for this year of 2015, go to your same church page. There's a tab called Remittances. Current statement will tell you exactly how much you should pay for each one of the funds, district and conference, along with the general church pieces.
Sure.
It will show you how much you've paid in the current month, how much you've paid year to date, and then what you have left.
Okay.
It will also show any special things that you have sent us, like advanced special givings for GBGM, UMCOR, any of the World Service offerings, 1 great hour of sharing. You'll also see all of those delineated as well. The one thing I enjoy, many of our local church treasurers say out there to us, well, I don't have a computer, I don't have email access or any of that. I always say, talk to your pastor. Your pastor, I know, has a computer, somehow access to the internet and can get on there for you. This is updated overnight, each night for whatever has come in that day.
Wow.
It's up to date. They can pull it at any given time.
Well, you bring up a good point that in this we've already talked so much about this website being a good resource. A lot of the online, the statistical report, we're getting ready to talk about that.
Yeah,
a lot of these documents are online, and so it's becoming increasingly important for those who serve as treasurers to have access, online access, and otherwise you're going to have a team of folk that can help if support that person.
This is true.
So anyway, all right, so let's finish up then with the statistical report.
I was going to say, before we go there, I want to add in about our apportionments too. Many people don't understand that maybe when we should pay them in, that kind of idea. The Book of Discipline actually says you should pay them with the same regularity that you pay your pastor.
Okay.
I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what it says. So that says on a monthly basis.
Sure.
As a best practice in the conference office for the Treasury Services, we've asked that maybe you pay them over a 10 or 11 month period. Sure. Don't wait till the end of December to pay everything. That is in essence our cash flow, trying to provide grants to local churches and other ministry opportunities, as well as the resources that you have here at the conference office. And so we need that for cash flow just like the local church does as well. So we're trying to run our own business just as the local church is running their own ministry business.
Sure. So the example or the parallel would be if 50% of your church members waited and paid their pledge in December, you would have a hard time funding your ministry through the year.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing at the district level. We're dependent on those apportionments coming in too.
Exactly.
And so a lot of that is used as grant and money that we hand right back out to churches, but we're limited by how much of the apportionments have come in.
Exactly.
So that's a great point. All right, so let's wind up with the statistical report, another fun part of the treasurer's job, at least a piece of it, because there is it table 2 or 3?
2.
Table 2 is a financial piece of it. So Bruce, how do you prepare for providing that information that is coming at the end of the year, kind of all throughout the year?
Well, I familiarize myself with the table 2
Sure.
to see what is going to be required. And I've set up have my general ledger accounts pretty much set up to where they'll feed right into, filling out that report.
So as you're updating monthly with the finances of the church, then you're already tracking some of
definitely.
the information.
Yeah, try to have it all set up at the beginning of the year to where it tracks it all year long, so that at the end of the year, when I have to send the information to Jennifer, it's
there.
It's there.
that would be huge. I think there are probably a lot of treasurers that aren't doing that, and if they could figure out how to start collecting the information all along the way, then it makes their job much easier at the end of the year.
Yeah, definitely, because usually the pastor will hit you up the night before it's due and say, I need these numbers.
So then treasurers can be preemptive, knowing that I would start after the first of the year, because that deadline is usually mid to third week of January.
Yes,
Yeah.
somewhere the 20th to 25th,
Yeah,
somewhere in
I
that
know, yeah.
neighborhood.
So ask for what, can they access that table too
Yes.
on the website as
Yes.
well? So you can go ahead and, as a treasurer, can get it
Yeah.
ahead of time, so you know what they're going to be asking you for.
'Cause
But you
we-
can't input the data, right? A treasurer.
Yes. There's, for the statistical system, and this is probably perfect timing for this, we'll try to have it open before Christmas so that everybody can access it, start seeing the blanks. Hopefully we can even get it before then this year. We're trying to do it earlier each year. But there's 2 logins that are created for each church. One for typically the pastor and one for an office person. Could be a
Okay.
treasurer, could be a secretary, whomever. But if you had either of those 2 access points, then anyone could enter it in.
Oh, okay.
You usually like to coordinate that so that everybody submits at the same time, has all the information. Many churches, the pastor or the pastor will oversee the whole process. A secretary might be keeping the membership and attendance information, so they'll enter in table 1. The treasurer will enter in table 2, is what's the financial stuff, the expenditure pieces,
Right.
and then table 3 is the revenue. So you might have a financial secretary doing that. Of the local church. So all 3 could do it, and then it just, once you see the review, then hit the button for submit.
But it is important, because we're all guilty of some typos, and
Yes.
you and I were laughing earlier at some of the statistics that have been reported
Yes.
that are way out of alignment. So eyeball proof what you've
Yes.
typed in to make sure that it looks like it's in line.
It's important because those table 2 expenditure numbers are the ones that are feeding into that apportionment calculation.
Right.
That's where we get those numbers from.
So you definitely want those to be in line.
Yes.
One thing that we have sort of talked a little bit about but didn't mention is software programs that different treasurers can use. And I know a lot of people use QuickBooks, and then there are also some other softwares that have finance versus membership and all kinds of. Any suggestions or thoughts about, and then we have some that are just using paper.
Paper. Yes, exactly. Nice 14-column paper, probably, if I had to guess still.
Right, but any suggestions or thoughts on what is helpful or the benefits of trying to use a software versus paper?
A little bit on some I know that may be available. I don't know all the names of them, but the ones like you talk about, like having the different modules for membership, contributions, etc. Our church uses one called Shepherd Staff, which is more of a United Methodist type. It was set up through Concordia Press, which was a part of Cokesbury at one point. And we have just a support fee that we have now once we bought the whole package that we needed, and we utilize that. It helps because it creates some of your table 2 for you if you've got it all programmed the way you need it. That's one, outside of just a typical accounting software like QuickBooks and that kind of thing.
We use CCB, Church Community Builder,
Okay.
but we're still using QuickBooks as far as our general ledger and accounts payable piece. And actually, we're doing QuickBooks online,
Right.
which that way I'm the volunteer treasurer and have a regular job. So,
Right.
you know, if I need to log in from,
Yes.
you know, whatever,
And-
I can get into, or from home.
And other people can log in
Yes.
as well, because
Right.
I've done that before, where if you need to look something up to make sure, oh, I have a big expenditure, make sure we're not going too out of line. It is accessible
Right.
to several folks, or can be.
Can be, yes.
And then one other question that we've not talked about in related to this is that report for councils that finance committees are usually responsible for. But I know that both of y'all probably, when you as treasurers show up to that council meeting, oftentimes are asked to make that report. And you know, what suggestions do you have for helping to provide the information that's going to be most helpful for your council folk that may not have an accounting background?
I find
Go ahead.
that most people are just like to see how much came in and how much went out, and broken down by the budget categories. Are we, tracking? Are we close to budget, over budget, under budget? Just the basic in and out.
So, which is different from maybe a complicated Quicken or QuickBooks report. Sometimes the report, okay, my experience, because I'm not an accounting numbers person, is I struggle to read some of the sort of pre-done reports that can be presented. And so sometimes it might take an extra step to provide the report for the council.
And especially with true not-for-profit accounting.
Yes.
With, restricted, permanently restricted, temporarily restricted. People don't have any idea. Half the time, we don't understand what,
Yeah, I don't even know what you
And-
just said. So.
Exactly.
Right, like I said, just the basic, how much came in and how much went out.
Right, and the line item, the basic budget areas to be able to track, are they within budget? Are they tracking with what we allotted for them as the year progresses? And how much money is left in case a new idea. That's another reason when a new idea comes up that wasn't budgeted,
Right.
and you've got to be able to look to say, okay, hey, can we help make this happen this year? If you've got that basic information so you can see where you may have some funds available. I think that's important for treasurers, particularly those of you that are strong in an accounting background, to work with your pastor and the finance chair to create a report that really is going to be helpful for your ministry leaders, and be sensitive to the fact that they might be embarrassed to ask questions because it kind of makes you feel stupid. And you understand this stuff and they may not, but it's really important that the churches understand what is the financial help. And y'all, as treasurers, are critical in interpreting that information for them.
Another piece, if I may, that we did, we call it our dashboard, that the Finance Committee went to Church Council a few years ago and said, what would you like to see?
Oh, wonderful.
And so we track, like member attendance,
Okay.
how much was given to the operating fund, where are we with budget, how much to the capital fund, things of that nature. It's just an Excel spreadsheet, a quick glance, and we go over that at every council meeting also.
Great. That just gives you a quick sense of how are we doing?
Right.
Are we trending? Are we
Exactly.
ahead of things? Are we behind where we might have been in the past? Right. Well, I think we're about done, so I just have one closing question for both of you. Since you both have served as treasurers, how long have you been a treasurer, Bruce?
Since assurance began, 19 years.
Okay, a bunch.
15?
How long have you served as treasurer,
I
Jennifer?
don't know. I'd say it's been a bunch too, because I know it wasn't very long after I got out of high school that I started doing this.
Sure. So, what would be your best advice to treasurers that, particularly new folks that are maybe just stepping into this role? What would be the advice you would want to share with them? Why don't we start with Bruce? We'll start with you.
Oh gosh. Just remember that it's, you see a lot of confidential information. You're going to say all kinds of things. Sometimes you'll have to wear different hats. Sometimes you might have to be a trustee, and you might have to be an SBRC person, or, the finance committee person. And, I've seen things, like tax garnishments or, liens and things of that nature that I had no idea that I would ever, in a local church
Right.
experience, but you see a little bit of everything.
Right.
So-
And you have to figure out how to handle
How to
it,
handle
and,
it.
and learn, and you've been able to do that every single time.
Yeah, and I have to, the conference website, they have great resources there. I go there a lot.
Good.
And also the general council.
GCF&A,
finance.
that's what I
yeah.
call them.
Yeah.
And that is an important point that you just made, that even though as treasurer you don't serve on trustees officially or PPRC, you do have to have an understanding for what those teams' work is about, so that you can support them. Because a lot of times they need to know funding, and so you've got to be able to help support them so they can do their job. And so sometimes you do have to learn beyond just the role of treasurer in the life of the church. Jennifer, what advice would you offer, a word of encouragement?
Just remember, you're not alone out there. any local treasurer, no matter how long you've been in it or how short a time you've been in it, you're not alone. We have a connectional system with 1,100 churches in our own conference. Every one of them has a treasurer. And it's not, you can call us, any of your other local treasurers that you know, get advice. Just ask the question. As we say in our office, there's not a dumb question.
Right.
We're going to answer them all. We may have heard them 10 times over the last week. We're still going to answer yours. Just call. Check the website. We have lots of good information there. There's always stuff new happening that we try to stay on top of and get out there as quickly as we can. Not always happening, but we're getting much better with all things coming new, especially with healthcare
Right.
and that kind of thing. So, but yes, and you're likely to see anything and everything.
Sure.
But just be prepared. Hang
Well, and my encouragement too is to call your district superintendent.
Yes.
That if you feel like you're stuck and aren't able to get the help that you need, that is another person, or even the administrative assistants in the office can sometimes help with getting you unstuck. That all of us are here to help you be able to do this important job to the best of your ability. And hopefully this time today has been another helpful resource, and we're grateful for both Jennifer and Bruce in sharing your expertise and some of the best practices that you have encountered, and we'll encourage you to explore the website and the handouts that are available connected to this video, and ask questions that you need, but know that we hold you in our prayers as you faithfully serve your church and take care again of those valuable resources so that we can do kingdom work. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.